The barn door nearly tore off its hinges when Perry Rourke flung it open, and the sound of it crashing against the weathered frame sent 3 starlings exploding from the rafters into the iron-gray sky above Harlan County, Wyoming. He stood in the threshold, chest heaving beneath his sheepskin coat, his jaw locked so tight the muscles in his cheeks trembled. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees in the last 6 hours. He could feel the cold snap's teeth sinking into the back of his neck, could see his own breath pluming out like smoke from a pistol barrel, and every single degree of that freeze felt like a personal accusation directed straight at him. Because inside his barn, curled beneath a horse blanket in the corner stall that had always belonged to his buckskin mare Clover, was Kate Grayson. She was asleep, or pretending to be. Either way, Perry Rourke had not moved a single thing inside this barn for 11 years, not since the day he drove the last nail into its frame with his own 2 hands, bled for it, starved a little for it, loved it the way a man loves the only solid thing he has ever built. He had moved his horse, Clover, the only creature on earth he trusted without reservation, into the lean-to addition on the east side of the barn, so that this woman, this stranger with her sharp eyes and her sharper tongue and her wagon full of secrets, could have the warmest, driest stall on his property. And she had not told him why she was really here. That was the part that was eating him alive. He had heard it in town 2 days ago, sitting at the counter at Harding's Mercantile, while old Ezra Harding wrapped brown paper around a pound of salt pork. 2 men talking low, thinking Perry Rourke was just a wall decoration because he rarely spoke in public. The name they mentioned had been Grayson, and the thing they said right after it had made Perry set down his coffee cup very, very carefully, so he would not crush it. They said Kate Grayson had something that belonged to a man named Cutter Dobbs. Cutter Dobbs, who had made it his life's work to ruin everything good in Harlan County for going on 6 years. Cutter Dobbs, who had tried to buy Perry's land 3 times, had threatened his fence line, had once poisoned his southern water trough because Perry refused to sell. Cutter Dobbs, who was not a man you ran afoul of without serious consequence. And now Kate Grayson, who had knocked on his door 3 days before the cold snap arrived and asked in a voice that gave nothing away whether she could shelter her horses in his barn while the freeze passed, was sleeping in his stall. Perry Rourke had said yes. He had moved his horse. He had done it without thinking too hard about why, without examining the impulse with any real scrutiny, only knowing that the woman standing on his porch in the failing afternoon light, with her dark hair pulling loose from its braid, and her chin lifted at exactly the angle of someone who has been refused before, and is waiting to be refused again, had made something twist in his chest that he had not felt in a very long time. He had said yes. And now he was standing in the doorway of his own barn in the killing cold, wondering if he had said yes to the wrong thing. 3 days earlier, the sky over the Rourke homestead had been the particular shade of pewter that old-timers in Wyoming recognized as a warning. Not a dramatic sky, not the rolling black towers of a summer storm, but a low, heavy, colorless lid pressing down on the land like a hand. Perry had been splitting wood when he heard wheels. He stopped mid-swing and listened. The track that ran past his place did not carry much traffic since the county had put in the better road 2 miles north, so wheels on his track meant either someone who knew where they were going or someone who was lost. The wagon that came around the bend between the cottonwoods was a single-horse rig, reasonably well-maintained but showing the kind of wear that meant hard travel rather than neglect. The horse pulling it was a bay gelding who moved with his head low, tired and honest. Behind the wagon on a lead rope followed a second horse, a gray mare with a white blaze, and the mare was favoring her left foreleg. Perry set down his axe. The woman driving the wagon had the reins gathered in both hands and was handling them without any of the fussing or overcorrecting that would have told him she was uncomfortable with horses. She knew what she was doing. She brought the rig to a stop about 10 yards from where he was standing, and she looked at him the way someone looks at a door they are not entirely sure is going to open. She was younger than he had expected, somewhere around 26 or 27, with dark eyes that assessed him quickly and without apology. Her coat was heavy canvas lined with something, practical rather than decorative. There was a cut on her left cheekbone, mostly healed, faded to a pale pink line, and something about the particular location and nature of that cut, high on the cheek where a man's ring might catch, made Perry's stomach go cold in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. "Are you Perry Rourke?" she asked. "I am," he said. "My name is Kate Grayson. I'm traveling through to Laramie and my mare threw a shoe this morning and twisted the leg on top of it. I've been going slow. I'm not going to make it to Forsyth Creek before the freeze comes in and I can't leave her in an open corral in this." She paused. She did not add the word please and he noticed that. She was offering him information, not begging. "I heard in Gallon that you have a barn. I can pay." Perry looked at the mare on the lead. The animal was holding her left fore up, barely touching it to the ground when she shifted her weight, and her eyes had the dull, quiet look of a horse enduring something rather than panicking about it. A good horse. A careful one. He looked back at Kate Grayson. "How much time have you got?" he asked. "Until the freeze breaks." She said it plainly without embellishment. "That could be 10 days, he said. "I know it," she said. Perry picked his axe back up, set it against the chopping block, and looked at the sky. "I've got one warm stall. My mare has it. I'll move her to the addition and your horse can have the mane." Something moved through Kate Grayson's expression. It was not quite relief, not quite gratitude. It was the complicated look of someone who has been given something unexpected and is already thinking about what it will cost. "That's not necessary," she said. "Your horse was there first." "My horse," Perry said, "is not lame." He picked up the axe and walked toward the barn. Later he would understand that that was the moment, not a dramatic moment, not a moment with lightning or music. Just a man walking toward a barn with an axe over his shoulder, making a decision whose full weight he would not understand for weeks. Kate Grayson climbed down from the wagon and followed. She was efficient in the barn, unwrapping the gray mare's leg, running her hands along the tendons with a practiced touch that told Perry she had done this before, not as a gentlewoman doing it for show, but as someone who knew what she was feeling for. The swelling was real, not severe, but real. The mare would need rest and cold compresses and a few days of gentle walking once the worst of it passed. "She's going to be fine," Kate said, more to the horse than to Perry. "What's her name?" he asked from where he was rearranging Clover's things in the East Addition. "Della. And the bay?" "Chester." She paused. "They're mine, both of them." He had not asked that. The fact that she had volunteered it struck him as interesting, as if she anticipated being questioned on the ownership of things. "Chester can go in the second stall," Perry said. "There's room." He showed her where the hay was, where the grain was stored, where the water pump had been moved inside the barn the previous winter to keep it from freezing. He showed her where the extra blankets were kept, the horse blankets, and where the lantern hooks were positioned. He did all of this without making it feel like a tour, just walking and pointing, and Kate followed without asking unnecessary questions. At the end of it, she stood in the middle of the barn with her hands in her coat pockets and looked at the stall she would be sleeping in, because that was clearly what she intended. "The house," Perry said, and then stopped. Kate turned and looked at him. "The house has a spare room," he said carefully. "It's no palace, but it's warm and there's a stove." "I appreciate that," Kate said, and her voice was measured in a way that sounded like a decision she had already made, "but I'll stay out here." Perry Rourke was not a man who pushed. "All right," he said. "Supper's at 6 if you want it." She came in for supper. She ate the beans and cornbread he put in front of her without comment on the quality of either, and she did not offer much conversation and he did not demand any. He had the feeling that silence was something she had learned to use carefully, like a tool with a sharp edge that could go either way. He asked her once at the end of the meal over coffee where she was from. "Missouri originally," she said. "More recently the eastern edge of the territory." "Grayson," he said, "you have people out here." "I did," she said, "not anymore." He did not ask what that meant. He poured more coffee and let it alone. She helped him clear the table without being asked, which surprised him, and she thanked him in the way someone thanks a person when they mean it, and not just when politeness requires it. And then she walked back out to the barn, and that was the first night. The cold snap arrived the next morning with a seriousness that surprised even Perry, who had lived in Wyoming for 11 years and understood its winters the way a man understands a difficult neighbor. The temperature fell to 20 below in the night. The sky turned the color of a tin plate, and the wind came down off the mountains with a sound like tearing paper, long and sustained and relentless. The creek behind the house froze hard enough to walk on within 18 hours. Perry moved through his chores in the cold with the focused economy of someone who has learned that in this kind of weather, every wasted motion costs you. He broke ice in the water troughs, put out extra hay, checked the seals on the barn door, and brought extra wood up onto the porch. He moved the way a man moves when he is alone and has always been alone, efficiently and without drama. He brought Kate a breakfast plate wrapped in a cloth at 7 in the morning. She was awake, had been for a while by the look of it. She was checking Della's leg, her breath making little clouds in the cold barn air, and she looked up when he came in with an expression that was, for the first time, unguarded. Surprised, he thought. Surprised that he had thought to do it. "You didn't have to," she said. "Figured the house was a long walk in this cold," he said. She took the plate. "Thank you, Perry." It was the first time she had used his name. It did something very quiet and very significant somewhere in the vicinity of his ribcage. He went back to the house without letting it show. By the afternoon of the second day, a pattern had established itself between them with the natural logic of two careful people sharing a space. He checked on the barn at midday and she would come to the house for the evening meal. They talked more during those dinners, cautiously at first, circling subjects the way a person circles a fire, getting close enough to feel the warmth without getting burned. He learned that she could read, which was not common, and that she had been educated to a higher standard than most women on the frontier. He learned that she had an opinion about the proposed railroad expansion through the southern part of the territory, and that the opinion was informed and direct, and not what he expected. He learned that she laughed at things that were actually funny, and not at things that were just politely supposed to be funny, which was rarer than it should have been. He did not learn why she was traveling alone in the dead of winter. He did not learn what had happened to whoever she had been traveling with before, because something in the shape of her silences told him there had been someone. He did not learn about the cut on her cheekbone, which was fading but still there. On the second night after supper, when she put her coat on to walk back to the barn, he stopped her at the door. "Kate," he said. She turned. He had been thinking about what he had heard in Harding's Mercantile. He had been turning it over all day, examining it from every angle, trying to decide if it was his business. It was not his business. And yet she was sleeping in his barn, and Cutter Dobbs was the kind of man who sent other men to do the finding for him. And if those men came to Perry Rourke's property looking for something that belonged to Dobbs, that made it Perry's business whether he liked it or not. "I heard your name mentioned in town," he said. He said it straight without preamble, because he did not know how to be dishonest and had never wanted to learn. In connection with Cutter Dobbs, the change in Kate Grayson was immediate and total. Every ounce of ease that had accumulated over 2 evenings of careful conversation drained out of her face in the space of a single second. What replaced it was not guilt. It was something colder and more concentrated than guilt. It was the look of someone recalculating a situation they thought they had controlled. "What exactly did you hear?" she asked. Her voice was steady. That steadiness, he thought, was not natural. It was practiced. "That you have something of his." The silence stretched. Outside, the wind drove itself against the south wall of the house with a sound like something trying to get in. "I do," she said finally. Perry waited. "Documents," she said. "Legal documents, bills of sale, transfer deeds, land titles, forged ones. Forged by Dobbs or for Dobbs, I am not certain which, but they were used to take 3 ranches in the eastern quarter of the territory from their rightful owners. Families, Perry, 2 of them with children. Her voice did not rise. It stayed level, which somehow made it worse. One of those families was my brother's. Perry was still. Your brother, Daniel Grayson. He ran cattle east of here near Powder River. He had a wife and 2 boys. Dobbs used those documents to claim a prior deed to the land. Took it through a judge in his pocket. Daniel's gone. She stopped. Not dead, but gone, scattered. He had to take his family and go because fighting Dobbs legally with no money and no powerful friends is not a fight you survive. And the documents, Perry said. I took them from Dobbs's man, Kate said. From his office manager, who is a coward and a drunk and who left them in a place where a woman willing to take a risk could find them. She touched the faded line on her cheekbone almost unconsciously. He noticed what was missing before I was entirely away. Perry looked at the cut on her cheekbone for a long moment. You're taking them to Laramie, he said, to the federal land office. To the federal circuit judge, Kate said. He arrives in Laramie in 15 days. He is not in Dobbs's pocket. I have spoken to people who would know. And Dobbs is looking for you. Dobbs's men are looking for me, she said. There is a difference and not much of one. Rourke stood in his kitchen doorway for a long moment. The fire in the stove was burning clean and steady behind him, and the cold outside was absolute. Somewhere in the night, in the east addition of his barn, Clover shuffled and blew. Go to bed, he said. Your mare needs her morning compress early. I'll help. Kate looked at him. Something moved in her dark eyes that he could not fully name, something that wanted to be hope and was not quite ready to be it yet. Perry, she said, you should know what you're involved in. I know what I'm involved in, he said. Go to bed. She went. He stood at the kitchen window for a long time after, looking out at the dark shape of his barn against the white frozen sky. Then he went to the corner of the bedroom where he kept his Winchester rifle, checked it, cleaned it though it did not need cleaning, and set it within reach of where he would sleep. The 3rd day was the day everything changed. The cold had settled into a deep and permanent feeling stillness by the morning of the 3rd day, the kind of cold that was no longer dramatic about itself, but simply existed as an absolute condition of being outside. Perry did his chores with his movements precise and careful. Kate helped. He had not asked her to, but she materialized at the water pump at the same time as him, and took one side of the task without comment. And they worked together with a wordless efficiency that startled him with how natural it felt. In the afternoon, while Kate was doing slow walking circles with Della inside the barn to keep the mare's blood moving in the cold, Perry was splitting the last of the wood he needed for the week. He had a rhythm going, the axe rising and falling, the crack of the wood splitting clean when he heard horses on the track, not 1 horse. 2. He set the axe down. He picked it back up. He walked around the side of the house where he could see the track without being seen. 2 men, heavy coats. The kind of deliberate, unhurried pace that men use when they are looking for something and are confident they are going to find it. One of them had a rifle in a scabbard. The other had both hands visible on his pommel, which did not mean he was unarmed. Perry knew the type. He had grown up in a place and a time when knowing that type was a survival skill. He went directly to the barn. Kate was walking Della in a slow circle near the door, and she read something in Perry's face the moment he came through because she stopped immediately and the mare stopped with her. 2 men on the track, Perry said quietly, coming to the house. Kate's hand went to the mare's neck, gripping the halter. How long do we have? 2 minutes, maybe 3. She did not panic, he had to note that. She did not panic and she did not become paralyzed and she did not ask questions that would waste time. She looked around the barn once decisively. Where? She said. Perry pointed to the tack room at the back. It was a narrow space, mostly dark, full of saddles and harness and the smell of leather and oil. There was no window. There was a bolt on the inside of the door. In there, he said. Bolt it and do not make a sound regardless of what you hear. The documents are in my saddlebag, Kate said. Della's side of the saddle. If something goes wrong, nothing is going to go wrong, Perry said. Go. She led Della back into her stall, unclipped the lead, and went to the tack room. At the door she turned once and looked at him. It was a look that held a great deal of weight for its brevity. Then she went inside and he heard the bolt slide home. Perry walked out of the barn and closed its door behind him and went back around the side of the house to the woodpile, where he picked up the axe and resumed splitting wood as if nothing had interrupted him. The two men rode into his yard about 90 seconds later. "Afternoon," said the one with the rifle scabbard. He was perhaps 40, with the kind of weathered blankness that comes from spending years doing things that do not bear close inspection. His companion was younger, heavy through the shoulders, with restless eyes that moved constantly over the property. "Afternoon," Perry said, and split a log. "We're looking for a woman," said the first man. "Brown hair, traveling with 2 horses. May have come through here in the last few days." Perry set another log on the block. "Don't get many travelers this time of year," he said. "Track past my place doesn't see much use since they put in the road north." The second man's eyes moved to the barn. "You got horses in there?" "One," Perry said. "My mare. Mind if we take a look?" Perry straightened up and looked at the man with the same steady, unhurried attention he gave to every problem he had ever faced. He had learned in his years in Wyoming that the way a man holds himself in a moment like this is the whole of the conversation. He did not look aggressive. He did not look nervous. He looked like a man who owns his land and knows it. "I do mind," Perry said pleasantly. "My property." The first man exchanged a glance with his companion. "We're not looking to cause trouble," he said. "The woman we're looking for may have taken something that doesn't belong to her." "If she did," Perry said, "that's a matter for a sheriff. You need directions to Gallon. Sheriff Blunt keeps an office there." The second man made a small sound that was not quite a laugh. The first man looked at Perry for a long moment with the calculating attention of someone deciding whether a particular obstacle is worth the effort. "If you do happen to see a woman matching that description," the first man said finally, "a man named Cutter Dobbs would appreciate knowing about it. He's a generous man to people who help him." "I'll keep that in mind," Perry said, and split another log. They sat on their horses for another moment. Then they turned and rode back down the track. Perry watched them go until they were out of sight around the bend through the cottonwoods. Then he watched for another full 5 minutes to make certain they were not circling back through the trees. Then he went to the barn. He knocked on the tack room door. "It's me," he said. The bolt slid back and the door opened. Kate stood in the narrow, dark space between the saddles, her hands composed at her sides, her face carrying the particular pallor of someone who has been holding themselves very still for a long time. "They're gone," he said. She came out of the tack room and stood in the main barn and breathed. Just breathed for a moment deeply, with her eyes closed. Then she opened them and looked at him with an expression that was complicated enough that Perry did not try to interpret all of it at once. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "You could have told them." "I could have," he agreed. "Most people would have," she said. "Dobbs makes it worth people's while to tell him what he wants to know." "I noticed that," Perry said. "He can keep his money." Kate looked at him for a long moment. "Why?" she asked. It was not an ungrateful question. It was a genuine one. She was trying to understand what kind of man he was and why he was doing what he was doing, and Perry thought that she probably had good reason to need to understand that because in her recent experience, men who helped tended to want something for it. "Because your brother's family lost their land," Perry said. "And I know what that is." He picked up a bridle that had fallen from its hook in the commotion and hung it back up. "And because those men who just left are the kind of men I have spent my entire life finding reasons not to agree with." Something in Kate Grayson's face shifted. It was not dramatic. It was more like the way ice sounds when it begins to go, a quiet, fundamental change in the structure of something that had been frozen for a long time. "Tell me about what you know," she said. "About losing land." He told her that evening over supper, and it was the most he had spoken about himself in years. He told her about coming west from Tennessee at 19 with nothing but a saddle and $60, and a particular stubbornness about building something that was his. He told her about the first winter, which had nearly killed him in the specific, impersonal way that the Wyoming winter kills without malice or preference. He told her about the 2 years it had taken to build the homestead piece by piece, cutting timber himself, moving stone, understanding slowly and with great effort what it meant to make a thing that would last. He did not tell her about the woman who had been supposed to share it with him and who had decided in the end that Wyoming was too far from everything she knew. He did not tell her about the 3 years of solitude after that, the particular quality of silence in a house that was meant for more than one person. He did not need to tell her those things. He had the feeling she understood something about it without being told. She told him more about Daniel, about their childhood in Missouri, about a father who had been hard in the way that men are hard when they are afraid of softness, about the way she and Daniel had been close in the way that siblings are close when the world outside their bond is unreliable. She told him about coming west to visit Daniel 2 years ago and finding herself unable to leave, drawn by something in the landscape that she did not have a clean word for. She told him about the day she found out what had happened to Daniel's claim. She had been in the territorial capital trying to navigate the legal channels when Dobbs's office manager, a man named Hatch, had let something slip that had told her where the original documents were kept. She had spent 3 weeks planning. She had not been impulsive about it. She had been careful and deliberate, and the fact that it had nearly gone wrong was not because of poor planning, but because Hatch had come back for something he had forgotten. "The cut on your face," Perry said. "It's fine," Kate said. "It was worse." "I know it was worse," Perry said quietly. "That kind of cut doesn't start small." Kate was quiet for a moment. "He hit me twice," she said. "But I had already taken the documents and I had already gotten to my horses, and the second hit was a parting shot because he couldn't catch me." She said it matter-of-factly, not performing toughness, just reporting facts. "I rode hard for 2 days and then Della threw the shoe." Perry was looking at the table. He was very still in the way that a man is still when something inside him is not still at all. "Hatch," he said. "Is he the one Dobbs sent?" "Probably," she said. "Or Dobbs sent someone else. Hatch is not a rider, he's a desk man." "The 2 men today were riders," Perry said. "Then Dobbs sent them separately," Kate said. "He would not wait for Hatch. Dobbs is organized in his ruthlessness. It's his most dangerous quality." Perry looked up at her. "How far does his reach go? The men today, they'll report back. They'll tell him they found a homestead with 1 man and 1 horse and moved on." "Unless they come back," Kate said, "with more." "How many days until the circuit judge arrives in Laramie?" 13 now," she said. "And the freeze," Perry said, looking toward the window where the darkness outside had the dense, impenetrable quality of extreme cold. "It will break in 4 or 5 days if we're lucky, 7 if we're not." "Which means if I wait for it to break," Kate said, "I could have as few as 6 days to make a 2-day ride." "It's doable," Perry said. "If nothing else goes wrong," she said. They sat with that for a moment. The fire in the stove made its soft, domestic, entirely ordinary sounds. Outside, the Wyoming night pressed against the walls of the house with its indifferent weight. "You should sleep in the house," Perry said. "Not for any reason other than that if more men come, I need to know immediately and I can't hear the barn from the bedroom." Kate looked at him across the table. The firelight moved on her face and in her dark eyes, and Perry Rourke, who had not looked at a woman that way in 3 years, made himself look at the table instead. "The spare room," he said. "The door locks from the inside." "I know you're not saying it for any other reason," Kate said, and something in her voice was different now, not harder but more careful, as if she was being very deliberate about the distance between what was and what might be. "Thank you." She moved her bedroll from the barn to the spare room that night. Perry lay awake in his bedroom for a long time, listening to the wind and the sounds of a house that had a second person breathing in it, and felt things he was not prepared to feel yet. The next 2 days were both the most ordinary and the most extraordinary days Perry Rourke had spent in years. The cold remained absolute. There was nothing to do about it, and so they moved through it, doing what needed doing with the animals and the house, and between the demands of the cold and the work, there was a great deal of time simply spent together in close proximity. Perry understood that this was doing something to him that he could not entirely prevent. He was not certain he wanted to prevent it. Kate was not a soft woman. He had understood that from the first moment. But there was a distinction between hardness and coldness that he had learned to recognize, and Kate Grayson was not cold. She was warm in the way that something that has been tested repeatedly at temperature is warm, not because the cold could not reach it, but because the warmth was structural, built into the material. She laughed when something was funny, genuinely, with her whole face involved. She was careful with the animals in the barn in a way that spoke of genuine feeling rather than habit. She argued with him about the railroad expansion, which was genuinely the most interesting conversation Perry had had in 2 years, and she was right about more of it than he was initially prepared to admit. On the 4th evening after supper, she asked him about Clover. "Tell me about her," Kate said. "Your mare." "How long have you had her?" Perry considered. 8 years, he said. "Bought her from a Cheyenne man who was passing through. She was 3, half quarter horse, half something else. Nobody was entirely sure what. She's the most sensible horse I've ever owned." "She sounds like it," Kate said. "She's been very patient about the rearrangement." "She is always patient," Perry said. "That's her primary quality. She applies it universally, whether work strangers in her stall." He looked at Kate with a look that had more warmth in it than he intended. "She's a good judge of situations." Kate smiled at that. It was a full smile, unhidden, and it reached every part of her face, and Perry looked away out of necessity. "Perry," she said, and her voice had changed register slightly, becoming something more serious. "When this is over, when I've gotten to Laramie and delivered the documents, I want you to know that I understand what you've risked here, harboring me, lying to those men. If Dobbs finds out, Dobbs is not going to find out," Perry said. "But if he does, Kate," Perry said, and he said her name with a weight that stopped her. "This is my land. I have spent 11 years here making it into something. I have lived alone here for 3 of those years, and I have been alone in a different way for the 8 before that, and I have not once, in all of that time, regretted any decision I made about who this land was for or who was welcome on it." He was looking at the table again. He had found in the last several days that looking at her directly when he said important things was more than he could manage without giving himself away entirely. "You're welcome here." That's not something I said lightly when I said it, and it's not something I take back now. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of things that neither of them said yet because the timing was wrong and they both knew it. "I know it," Kate said softly. "I know it, Perry." The 6th day brought a slight moderation in the cold, not a true break but a softening, as if the weather were considering its options. Perry watched the sky carefully. He had lived here long enough to read it the way other men read newspapers, in slow, habitual study. He thought they had perhaps 2 more days before a proper thaw began. He was examining the southern fence line, one of the sections that ice could damage if the posts worked loose in the freeze, when he heard the horses. Not 2 this time, 4. He counted the hoofbeats while he was still below the rise of the south hill, and then he went low and fast back toward the homestead. He came in from the east side, staying below the tree line, and came around the corner of the barn without being seen. Through the gap between the barn and the house he could see them in the yard. 4 riders, 2 of the same men who had come before. 2 new ones, and the new ones had a different quality about them, harder and more deliberate, the quality of men who were not primarily messengers, and they had already dismounted, already at the door of the house. Perry moved. He came through the barn's back door, which was never used and whose hinges he kept oiled for no reason he had been able to articulate to himself before this moment, and he went through the interior of the barn in the dark and came out the front door behind the group of men at the house. His Winchester was in his hands. He had picked it up from the house on his way through, or rather he had planned to, but he had come through the barn instead, and the Winchester was in the house. He had his belt knife. He had the axe he had been carrying to examine the fence post. He had, as he came around the corner of the barn, the advantage of surprise. "Get away from the door," he said. All 4 men turned. The 2 new ones had a practiced unhurriedness about the turning that told Perry they had been in this situation before and had calculated that whoever was behind them had a limited amount of follow-through available to him. "You the homesteader," said one of the new men. He was perhaps 45, lean, with pale eyes that made Perry think of water in winter, colorless and deep and cold. "I am," Perry said, "and this is my property and you're not welcome on it." "We're looking for something that was taken from a man named Cutter Dobbs," said the pale-eyed man. "We have reason to believe the woman who took it came through here." "You searched my property 5 days ago," Perry said. "You found nothing." "We'd like to search it again," the pale-eyed man said. "More thoroughly." Perry was aware of the precise geometry of the situation. 4 men, 2 of whom were dangerous in a practiced way, against himself with a belt knife and an axe and no rifle in his hands. He was also aware that Kate was in the house and that the documents were, unless Kate had moved them, in Della's saddlebag in the barn, 20 feet from where he was standing. "No," Perry said. The pale-eyed man looked at him with an expression that had a kind of patient, impersonal quality to it. "Friend," he said, "you need to think very carefully about what you're doing here." "I've thought about it," Perry said. "The answer is no. If Cutter Dobbs has a legal claim to anything on this property, he can present it to the court. Until he does, 4 men standing in my yard at gunpoint constitute a trespass, and I will defend my property accordingly." There was a silence. The pale-eyed man was reassessing something. Perry could see it in the slight shift of his attention. Then the front door of the house opened. Everyone looked. Kate Grayson stood in the doorway with Perry's Winchester in her hands, the barrel up in her eye behind the sight with the composed, unhurried accuracy of someone who had grown up handling a rifle and had not forgotten how. "He said no," Kate said. The geometry of the situation had changed completely and everyone present understood it. 2 people, 1 rifle, 4 men who were reassessing the likelihood of a clean outcome. "That's Dobbs's property in your hands," the pale-eyed man said. He was talking to Kate, but he had not taken his eyes off the Winchester. "It is not," Kate said. "It's documentation of a crime, which makes it evidence, and evidence belongs to the court, not to the man who committed the crime." Her voice was absolutely steady. "You can ride back to Cutter Dobbs and tell him that in 15, now 12 days, a federal circuit judge is going to see what I'm carrying, and everything Dobbs has taken by fraud will come undone. Tell him to spend the next 12 days preparing himself for that." The pale-eyed man was quiet for a moment. "You understand this doesn't end well for you," he said. "Tell him," Kate said. Another long silence. Then the pale-eyed man looked at Perry with a particular expression, not threatening exactly, but promising. The expression of someone filing away information for later use. "We'll be back," he said. "I know it," Perry said. "I'll be here." They mounted up and rode out. Perry watched them until the track bend hid them. Kate came down from the porch with the Winchester and stood beside him, and they both watched the empty track for a while. "That was my rifle," Perry said. "I know it was," she said. "Can you actually shoot it?" "I grew up in Missouri," she said. "My father was hard, but he was practical. He taught both of us." Perry looked at her sideways. The afternoon light on her face was clear and direct, and she had the look of someone who has just done something frightening and is now feeling the full weight of what it cost. "You were afraid," he said. "Of course I was afraid," she said. "That doesn't mean much." Perry looked back at the track. "They'll come back with more," he said. "That man with the pale eyes is not done." "I know it," Kate said. "We need to talk about getting you to Laramie before this freeze fully breaks," Perry said. "We can't wait for the road to be clear. We need to go while there's still enough ice that we can cross the creek at the lower ford without backtracking. It will add 2 days to the ride in summer but save us a full day in this weather." Kate looked at him. She said. "Did you think I was going to put you on the road alone?" Perry said. "With those men behind you?" "I managed to get this far alone," Kate said. "You nearly got caught twice," Perry said, "and you threw a shoe and you spent 6 days in a stranger's barn because of it." He said it without any edge, just facts. "You've done remarkably well alone. I'm not arguing that. I'm saying you don't have to do this part alone." Kate Grayson was quiet for a long moment. She was looking at the frozen track, and something in her expression was doing something complicated, working through something, moving past something. "There are 2 more days of this cold," she said. "Maybe 3. 1 day to give Della enough rest to travel," Perry said. "1 day to prepare, then we move." "Your ranch," Kate said. "Your animals, your fence lines. My neighbor to the north, Aldous Fenn, owes me 3 favors and has been looking for a reason to repay them," Perry said. "He's a good man. He'll watch the place." Kate turned and looked at him directly. The Winchester was still in her hands, and her dark eyes were very steady and very serious, and something in them was asking him a question that had nothing to do with logistics. "Why are you doing this?" she said. Not the way she had asked before, not the careful analytical question of someone assessing hidden motives. This was different. This was the question underneath that question. Perry Rourke held her gaze and told himself to be honest, because he had never known how to be anything else. "Because you matter," he said. "What you're doing matters," and because he stopped. "Because," she said, he looked at her. At her face in the flat winter light, the dark eyes and the fading cut, and the way she was holding his rifle with a kind of natural competence that said everything about who she was. He thought about the past 6 days, about the evenings over supper, about the way the house had sounded with 2 people in it, about the rhythm they had found together at the water pump in the morning cold. "Because I don't want you to leave," he said quietly. "Not yet. And going with you is the only way I can think of to extend the time." The silence that followed was warm in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. Kate looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked down at the rifle in her hands and then back up at him. "That's an honest answer," she said. "I don't know how to give any other kind," he said. Something in Kate's face shifted again, that deep structural shift, like ice beginning to move. She handed him back the Winchester with both hands, a deliberate gesture, a giving back that felt like it was giving something else besides. "2 days," she said. "I'll be ready." Perry took the rifle. His fingers brushed hers in the exchange, and neither of them moved immediately, and the cold air between them was suddenly not cold at all. 2 days, he agreed. He went to Aldous Fenn's place that evening on horseback, breaking trail through snow that had drifted knee-high against the north fences, and he explained the situation in enough detail for Fenn to understand the necessity, without burdening the old man with specifics that could put him at risk. Fenn was 64 years old and had been in Wyoming longer than Perry, and had the kind of calm, rooted solidity that comes from having seen most of what the territory could produce. "Dobbs's men," Fenn said from his kitchen doorway holding a lantern. "Dobbs's men," Perry confirmed. Fenn was quiet for a moment. "Daniel Grayson," he said. "Out near Powder River. I heard about that business." "That was a theft, what Dobbs did. Plain theft dressed up in paper." "It was," Perry said. "Go," Fenn said. "I'll watch your place. Take care of that woman." Perry rode back through the dark and the cold and the stars that were so bright and so plentiful in a sky that cold that they seemed close enough to touch, and he thought about all of it with a clarity that the cold and the dark and the stars seemed to require. He thought about the way Kate had looked standing in his doorway with his rifle. He thought about the shape of her laugh. He thought about 11 years of a house that was meant for more than one person. He thought about the choice he had made to move his horse out of the warm stall, which had seemed like such a small thing, and which now seemed like the first step of something much larger, something he was only now beginning to understand the full dimensions of. He was in love with her. He was not surprised by this. He was simply aware of it the way he was aware of the cold, as a condition of the world that had to be acknowledged before anything else could be done. The question was whether she was ready to hear it. He thought the answer might be not yet. She had things to finish first, and he respected that completely. There would be time. He had to make sure there was time. The morning of the 8th day of the cold snap, Perry Rourke saddled Clover before dawn. He had spent the previous day preparing with the methodical thoroughness that was his primary quality under pressure. He packed supplies for a 3-day ride. He packed the saddlebags for Chester with the specific intention of being able to move fast if necessary. He checked every piece of tack on both horses and on Clover twice. He cleaned his Winchester and his Colt revolver, which he wore but rarely used, and he loaded both with the awareness that he hoped not to use either and the certainty that he needed to be prepared. Kate had spent the previous day doing her own preparations with the same quiet precision. She had wrapped the documents, which Perry had seen once briefly, a folded packet of papers covered in dense handwriting and official-looking seals, in oilskin, and placed them in a flat leather pouch that she wore under her coat against her body. That seemed like the right decision to Perry, and he said so. "I've been carrying them that way since I took them," she said. "It seemed obvious." "It's good thinking," he said. "It's basic thinking," she said, and then, softening it slightly, "I've had a lot of time to think about all the ways this could go wrong." Della's leg was better. Not perfect, not ready for hard riding, but the swelling was down and she was bearing weight evenly, and Kate had walked her the previous afternoon for a sustained period and pronounced her capable of the journey at a moderate pace. Chester would carry the packs. They left before the sun was fully up, in the steel-blue pre-dawn, with the cold still absolute and the snow creaking under the horses' hooves. Perry rode Clover and Kate rode Della, and Chester came along on a lead rope behind Kate, his breath making great plumes in the still air. For the first hour they rode mostly in silence. Not the silence of discomfort, but the silence of focus, of two people who are not wasting energy on unnecessary noise because they are attending to everything around them. Perry set the pace, moderate and steady, watching the tree line and the rises. The track to the lower ford ran through a stretch of open ground that he did not love, but the alternative route through the canyon was too slow and too enclosed. He chose the open ground and he watched it carefully. "Tell me about what comes next," Kate said, when they were through the open stretch and into the better cover of the river cottonwoods. "After Laramie, after the judge." "The documents go into the record," Perry said. "The judge orders an investigation. Dobbs will try to delay it. He has enough connections to buy some time, but the federal level is where his connections start to run thin." "And Daniel's land?" Kate asked. It was the question beneath every other question she had asked. "The false deed gets voided," Perry said. "The original claim gets reinstated. It takes time. It's not fast. The law out here moves the way everything out here moves, which is under great pressure and very slowly." He looked at her. "But it happens." Kate rode in silence for a moment, her eyes on the frozen river through the cottonwood branches. "He has 2 boys," she said. "Thomas and Eli. Thomas is 7. Had just learned to ride when it happened." A pause. "He cried when they left, not about going, but about leaving his horse. They couldn't take everything." Perry did not say anything for a moment. He let that sit in the cold air between them. "When Daniel gets the land back," he said finally, "the horse will be waiting. What happened to it?" "A neighbor kept it," Kate said. "The Fenimore family, they're good people. They said they'd hold it as long as necessary." "Then Thomas's horse is fine," Perry said. "And Thomas will be back on it." Kate looked at him. The look lasted a beat longer than necessary. "You have a way of making things sound possible," she said. "Most things are," Perry said. "Eventually." They made good time through the morning, better time than Perry had expected given the conditions. Della held up well, her gait smooth and even, no sign of favoring the leg. Clover moved over snow and ice with her habitual sensible competence, finding the solid footing without being directed to it. Chester, unburdened by a rider, came along happily. At midday they stopped by a frozen spring where Perry broke the ice with a rock and let the horses drink from the seep below and ate the food he had packed from his kitchen that morning. Cold biscuits and salted ham and dried apple, which was not elegant but was what the situation called for. "Perry," Kate said, pulling her coat tighter. They were sitting on a fallen log at the spring's edge and the sun was at its highest point, which in a Wyoming December was not very high. "Can I ask you something direct?" "You generally do," he said. She almost smiled. "The woman, the one the house was supposed to be for." Perry was still for a moment. "What about her?" "What happened?" He looked at the frozen spring. "She decided the frontier was not what she wanted," he said. She was from a town in Missouri. She had family there and friends, and the kinds of things you give up when you come west. She came out in the spring and stayed through the summer, and by September she was honest with me about it. He was quiet. I respected the honesty. But, Kate said, but I had already built the house for two, he said. And after she left I kept living in it and kept noticing that it was built for two. He picked up a twig and turned it in his fingers. You adjust. You learn to ignore the shape of the empty space, but you don't forget it. Kate was quiet for a while. The horses stamped and breathed at the spring. My husband, she said, and Perry went very still, died 2 years ago, before I came west. He was a good man. Not exceptional, but genuinely good, and that matters more than exceptional when you're building a life with someone. A pause. He got sick in the winter of '86. It went fast. He was gone in 6 weeks. I'm sorry, Perry said. I'm sorry too, Kate said. And then I came west to see Daniel, and Daniel's trouble started, and then I was focused on that, and I didn't have time or space to. She stopped. I haven't thought about what comes after Laramie. You could, Perry said. He said it carefully, not wanting to push, not wanting to imply anything she was not ready for. Think about it, I mean, while we ride. Kate looked at him sideways. While we ride, she said. The territory is full of options, Perry said, keeping his voice even. Plenty of places worth settling in. Plenty of places, Kate agreed. She was still looking at him with that sideways look, that considering look, and there was something in it that warmed Perry all the way through and had nothing to do with the December sun. They rode on. By evening they were 2/3 of the way to Laramie. They made camp at a spot Perry knew. A shallow depression in the south face of a ridgeline that cut the wind effectively and held the heat of a fire better than open ground. Perry built the fire with the swift, confident efficiency of a man who has done it hundreds of times, and within 20 minutes they had flame and warmth, and the horses were picketed in the best shelter the terrain offered. They sat close to the fire because the cold required it. Their shoulders were almost touching. Perry was very aware of this in a way that he accepted without trying to manage it. I've been thinking, Kate said, looking into the fire. About what? Perry said. About what you said. About not wanting me to leave yet. She turned and looked at him, and her face in the firelight was the most honest face Perry had ever seen. No shields up, no performed composure, just a woman looking at a man and telling him the truth. I've been thinking about that. Perry held her gaze. I think, Kate said very carefully, that I don't want to leave either. The fire crackled. A horse shifted on its picket. Somewhere in the dark distance a coyote made its hollow, musical sound, and the stars overhead burned in their cold thousands. Kate, Perry said. Not yet, she said, and she reached out and put her hand over his where it rested on his knee. Let me finish. I have not let myself want anything for myself in 2 years. 2 years of Daniel's fight, and before that 2 years of grieving, and before that years of building something that then ended. I have been very careful not to want things. Her hand was warm over his, and it was the most vivid sensation Perry had experienced in years, simple and overwhelming. But I want this. Perry turned his hand over under hers and held it. I want this too, he said. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, letting the fire talk for them, while the cold Wyoming night turned above them with its indifferent beauty, full of stars that cared nothing about the two people sitting close together below them and keeping each other warm. He kissed her once, gently, before they slept, and it was the kind of kiss that is a beginning rather than a destination, careful and warm and full of everything that was going to come after. The next morning they rode into Laramie. Laramie, in December of 1887, was a town that had not yet decided what it wanted to be. The railroad had come through years before, and the cattle trade gave it a particular vitality and a particular roughness. The streets were half-frozen mud, and the buildings ranged from solid brick at the commercial center to raw timber at the edges. It smelled of horses and coal smoke, and the particular metallic cold of the high plains. Perry was watchful coming in. He did not think Dobbs's men had outpaced them, not on the routes they had taken, but caution was not a policy he abandoned simply. because it had not been tested recently. Kate led them directly to the federal courthouse, which was a two-story brick building that looked out of place in its block the way all federal buildings in frontier towns looked out of place, as if the government had been determined to assert solidity in a place that was still deciding whether to be solid. The clerk at the front desk was a young man with spectacles and the permanently harassed expression of someone who has been asked to process things that his filing system was not designed for. "I need to speak to someone about evidence for the Federal Circuit Court," Kate said. She pulled the oilskin packet from under her coat and laid it on the desk with a care and a finality that Perry found very moving, the care of someone setting down something they have been carrying a very long time. "These are documents relating to fraudulent land transactions in the territory. The names involved include Cutter Dobbs of Harlan County and a federal land claim dispute affecting the Grayson family holdings at Powder River." The clerk looked at the packet. He looked at Kate. He looked at Perry. Perry looked back at him without expression. The clerk called for someone more senior. The next 2 hours were the kind of hours that matter enormously in terms of their effects and are largely undramatic in their execution. Documents were examined. Statements were taken. Kate sat across a desk from a territorial marshal named Hendricks and explained everything, from the beginning, calmly and in complete detail, with Perry beside her. Marshal Hendricks was a serious man who listened without interrupting, which Perry respected. When Kate finished, Hendricks looked at the documents for a long time. "These are authentic," he said, not a question. He had the look of someone recognizing something he had been looking for. "Authentically fraudulent," Kate said. "Yes." "Dobbs," Hendricks said, and said it in the tone of a man setting down a weight he has been carrying for a while. "We've had concerns about Dobbs for 3 years. Nothing actionable. Until now." He took custody of the documents with official ceremony and gave Kate a receipt that she folded and put carefully in her coat pocket. He told her that the circuit judge, whose name was Farrow, was expected in 6 days and that her testimony would be required. He told her that a warrant for the questioning of Cutter Dobbs would be issued within 24 hours, and that this would considerably limit Dobbs's ability to continue harassing her or anyone else associated with the matter. When they came out of the courthouse into the pale winter afternoon, Kate stood on the steps and breathed the cold air and looked at the street. Perry stood beside her and said nothing, because some moments are better without words. After a while Kate said, "It's done." "The first part is done," Perry said. "The rest will follow." She turned and looked at him, and her face was something he was going to remember for the rest of his life. Not triumphant exactly, not relieved exactly. Something that combined both of those things and added to them a deep, quiet exhaustion. The exhaustion of someone who has held something up through sheer will for a very long time and has finally been able to set it down. He put his arm around her, there on the federal courthouse steps, in front of the frozen mud street and the coal smoke and everyone in Laramie, and she leaned against him with the uncalculated ease of someone coming home. They stayed in Laramie for 9 days. During those 9 days, Perry watched Kate Grayson become lighter in the way that a person becomes lighter when a weight they have been carrying is definitively removed. He watched her sleep properly, for the first time since she had arrived at his barn, through the whole night without waking. He watched her eat well and laugh without the sharp edge of calculation behind it. He watched her spend an afternoon writing a letter to Daniel, long and detailed, covering 3 sheets of paper, and when she finished writing it, she looked up at Perry with eyes that were bright in a way that could have been tears but was something more than that. "He'll come back," Perry said. "He'll come back," Kate said. The warrant for Cutter Dobbs's questioning was issued, as Hendricks had promised. It did not immediately end Dobbs's power in Harlan County, because power of that kind does not end in a day, but it removed his most dangerous weapon, which was the ability to act without consequence. A man who knows a federal marshal is watching him is a man considerably diminished in his options. Perry sent a letter to Aldous Fenn explaining that the situation was resolving and that he would be back within 2 weeks and thanking Fenn for his care of the property. He spent a great deal of time with Kate. They walked the streets of Laramie in the mornings, talking. They talked about everything. About Missouri and Tennessee, and the different and similar textures of childhood in the American South. About Daniel and about the woman in Perry's past, and about what grief is and what it costs and what it leaves behind when it finally starts to subside. About horses and land and the particular quality of a Wyoming winter that is brutal and also undeniably, stubbornly beautiful. About what a life could look like. About what a life should look like. On the fourth evening in Laramie, over supper at the hotel where they were staying in separate rooms, Kate said, "I want to come back to the homestead with you." Perry set down his fork. He looked at her across the table with the full, open attention that he had been giving her since the first day she drove her wagon around the bend through his cottonwoods. "Tell me what that means," he said. "Precisely." Kate looked at him with a directness that was characteristic of her and that he had come to understand as one of the most honest things about her. "It means I want to stay," she said. "Not as a guest, not in the barn," a pause. "I want to build something with you, if that's what you want." "Kate," Perry said, "I know it's fast," she said. "I know we've known each other 2 weeks. 17 days, he said. She almost smiled. 17 days. But I have spent enough of my life being careful about the wrong things and not careful enough about the right things to know the difference between what matters and what doesn't." She held his gaze. "This matters." "It does," Perry said. "So," she said. "So," he said, and reached across the table and took both her hands in his. "Yes, come back with me. Stay." He looked at her with everything he had been feeling since the day she drove into his yard, everything he had been careful about, and was no longer going to be careful about. "Stay for as long as you want, and I'll spend every day making it worth wanting to stay longer." The smile that broke across Kate Grayson's face was different from any other smile he had seen from her. It was not the careful smile, or the amused smile, or the bright with effort smile. It was the smile of someone who has finally stopped bracing for impact. He kissed her properly that evening, not with the careful restraint of the campfire kiss, but with everything he actually felt, and she kissed him back with an equal honesty, and it was nothing at all like a beginning because they were already well past the beginning. They were somewhere in the middle of something good. Kate testified before Judge Farrow on the 7th day in Laramie. She was composed and precise and completely credible, and Perry sat in the back of the courtroom watching her, and thought that, whatever difficulties she had faced in her life, they had made her someone formidable in the best sense of the word, someone whose inner structure was stronger than what had been thrown at it. Judge Farrow found the documents credible. He ordered a full investigation into the land transactions in question. He issued a formal legal directive voiding the fraudulent deed that had displaced the Grayson family, and placed the original claim back in the official record pending verification. He described Cutter Dobbs, in the precise language of the law, as a person of significant legal interest to the federal court. It was not the end of Dobbs's story in one day, but it was the end of his ability to make Kate's story difficult, and it was the beginning of Daniel Grayson's road back to his land. Kate walked out of the courthouse that day with Marshal Hendricks's assurance that she was no longer in danger from Dobbs's representatives, and with the receipt for the documents filed securely in her coat, and with Perry Rourke's hand in hers, and she looked up at the pale winter sky and breathed. "Thank you," she said, and it was not clear who she was saying it to, him or the sky or something more abstract than either. "Come on," Perry said. "Let's go home." They rode back to the Rourke homestead on a day when the cold snap had fully broken, the temperature rising to something merely cold rather than brutal, the sky for the first time in 3 weeks showing streaks of actual blue between the clouds. The road was heavy going in places where the snow was melting into deep mud, but Clover and Della moved through it with equanimity, and Chester followed along behind with his customary cheerful willingness. They came down the track through the cottonwoods, and the homestead came into view in the late afternoon light, the barn and the house and the fence lines and the frozen creek in the distance, and Perry looked at all of it with the familiar feeling he had been feeling for 11 years, but with something new layered over it. Something he had been missing and had not known he was missing until now. Kate looked at it too from horseback, with an expression he was learning to read. "It's good land," she said. "It is," he agreed. "The south fence needs a post replaced," she said. He looked at her. "How do you know that?" "I was watching when you rode out to check it that morning," she said. "I've been thinking about it since." "I was going to do it before the freeze," Perry said. "We'll do it this week," she said, "when the ground thaws enough." He looked at her sitting on Della in the late light with her dark braid loose and her practical coat and her calm, assessing eyes and her hands easy on the reins, and he felt something so large and so right that it had no name in English and possibly in no other language either. "We'll do it this week," he agreed. Aldous Finn came over that first evening and found them in the barn, settling the horses back in. Clover returned to her proper warm stall and Della in the second stall and Chester in the addition. Finn stood in the barn door and looked at the arrangement, and at the two of them working side by side in the lamplight, and made no comment except to say that the south fence post had worked itself loose and that Perry might want to see to it. "I know it," Perry said. "I'll bring supper tomorrow," Finn said. "Let you two get settled." And he walked back across the dark field to his own place without making anything more of it, which was one of the many things Perry valued about Aldous Finn. The days that followed were the kind of days that constitute a life, not dramatic, not extraordinary in their individual parts, but accumulative in their warmth, each one adding to the one before it, building something solid from ordinary material the way a good house is built. They repaired the fence post. Kate was as useful at it as Perry was, which did not surprise him. They cleared the brush from the south side of the barn that had been blocking the light from the small east window, which Kate had noticed the first morning and mentioned 3 separate times. Perry had not noticed it in 11 years, and he told her so. "You were living alone," Kate said, from up on the fence post they were strapping. "When you live alone you stop seeing things." "What do you mean?" he asked. "When you live alone," she said, climbing down with the ease of someone not afraid of heights, "you adapt to the inconveniences. You stop seeing them as problems because there's no one to point them out. The brush blocking the window is just the brush. But when someone else is here, it becomes something that should be fixed." She looked at the cleared wall with satisfaction. "It's a good thing." He loved her. He had known it before, but he knew it more precisely now. He loved the way she talked about problems as things to be solved. He loved the way she moved through his space as if it had always had room for her. He loved that she talked to Clover the way she talked to Della, with the same warmth and the same respect, not playing favorites. On a February evening, sitting by the fire with the cold outside doing its late winter last effort against the walls of the house, Perry reached into the pocket of his coat where he had placed a small thing 2 days earlier after a visit to Laramie without Kate that he had described as a supply run. "Kate," he said. She looked up from the letter she was writing to Daniel. She had been corresponding with Daniel regularly since Laramie, and Daniel's letters back had the particular quality of someone returning slowly to himself after a long absence. "I have something for you," Perry said. He held it out. It was a ring, simple silver with a small turquoise stone that the jeweler in Laramie, an old Navajo man who had a shop on the east end of the main street, had set with evident care. It was not elaborate. It was not expensive in the way that expensive is measured in cities, but it was right. Perry had known it was right the moment he saw it. Kate looked at it and then looked at him. 17 days, she said. 17 days and 2 months and every day for the rest of whatever comes after, Perry said. I'm not asking you to decide today. I'm asking you to know that this is what I want, that this is where I am. Kate set down her letter. She looked at the ring in his palm and then back up at him with her honest, dark eyes. Perry Rourke, she said. Kate Grayson, he said. She reached out and took the ring from his hand and looked at it closely, turning it in the firelight, the turquoise catching the warm colors. Yes, she said. Obviously yes. He put the ring on her finger, and they sat together in the firelight in the house that was built for two, with the horses settled in the barn and the Wyoming winter doing its last efforts outside, and it was the most complete thing Perry had ever felt. They were married in April. Aldous Finn stood up with Perry. The ceremony was performed by the circuit preacher who came through Harlan County in the spring, a serious man named Whitmore who read the words with care and gravity, and shook Perry's hand afterward with the particular warmth of someone who understands that what they have just witnessed matters. Kate wore a dress she had sewn herself through the winter evenings. It was deep blue, which Perry had not expected, and which suited her in a way that made him forget briefly how to speak when she came out of the spare room that morning. She had put flowers from the early spring, the wild ones that came up first along the creek, into her hair. Aldous Finn cried, which he would firmly deny for years afterward. Daniel came. That was the thing that made Kate's happiness complete. Daniel Grayson arrived 2 days before the wedding with his wife Clara and the 2 boys, Thomas and Eli, in a wagon that still showed the wear of difficult travel, but that carried also something of the look of a wagon pointed home. The federal proceedings were moving forward. The reinstatement of the original claim was in process. It would take another several months to be fully confirmed, but Daniel had the assurance of the federal marshal and the circuit judge, and the copy of the court record Kate had obtained for him, and he had found temporary work on a ranch near Powder River while he waited for the land to come back to him. Thomas, who was 7 and serious-faced, and had his father's dark eyes, spent most of the wedding day at the fence of Perry's paddock watching Clover move. "She's a good horse," he told Perry with the solemn authority of someone who has thought hard about this. "She is the best horse," Perry said with equal seriousness. "Better than Chester. Different from Chester," Perry said. "Chester is good too, but Clover is mine, and that makes her particular." Thomas considered this with great care. "My horse is named Pilgrim," he said. "He's at the Fenimore place. I'm going to get him when we go back." "Is he fast?" Perry asked. "He's the fastest," Thomas said, not as a boast but as a statement of observed fact. Perry looked down at the boy and thought about the shape of the future, the way it spread out from where he was standing in directions he could not fully see, but that felt good. He thought about what it meant to have a house full of people, and a barn full of horses, and a woman in the blue dress, talking to her brother in the April sunshine. Eli, who was 5 and had no such solemnity as his brother, had by afternoon discovered that Perry's chicken yard contained chickens who could be made to run in circles if you moved your arms in a particular way, and he was devoting himself to this discovery with the full energy of his 5 years. Clara Grayson found Perry at the well in the late afternoon, and stood next to him looking at the homestead with the assessing eyes of someone who has lost a home and understands what a home is. "You're a good man," she said. "Kate told me some of it in her letters, but not all of it. You moved your horse." Perry looked at her sideways. "My horse was fine," he said. "She's hardy." "That's not the point," Clara said. "The point is that you did it without being asked and without making anything of it." She looked at him steadily. "That's the kind of thing that tells you what someone is." Perry looked across the yard to where Kate was standing with Daniel in the sunlight, and he thought about what it had taken to be standing here, the cold and the risk and the documents, and the men on horses and the long ride and the 9 days in Laramie and all of it, and he thought it was without question the most worthwhile thing he had ever done. Summer came to the Rourke homestead with its full, expansive authority. The creek ran clear and fast. The grasses in the south pasture came in lush and deep. Clover foaled in June, a big colt that Perry had not been expecting, brown as coffee with 4 white socks, and Kate named him before Perry had a chance to, called him February, which was when he must have been conceived, and the name stuck immediately the way all right names do. Kate planted a kitchen garden on the east side of the house, in the spot where the brush had been cleared, where the morning light now fell unobstructed. She planted beans and squash and the wild herbs she had found along the creek. By July, the garden was producing with the exuberant abundance of well-placed effort. She and Perry worked the ranch together in the full sense of the word, not in the divided sense of he does the outdoor work and she does the indoor work, though she did the indoor work as well, and he did the outdoor work as well, but in the integrated sense of two people who are both invested in the same thing and bring different qualities to it. Kate had a clear-eyed practicality about what the ranch needed that complemented Perry's deep knowledge of the land and the animals. They disagreed sometimes productively, and they resolved those disagreements in the way that two honest people with mutual respect resolve them. Letters came from Daniel through the summer. The federal process moved, as Perry had predicted it would, slowly and under great pressure. By August, the Grayson claim at Powder River had been officially reinstated. The false deed was voided. The land was Daniel's again. The letter Daniel sent when it happened was not long. It said, among other things, "Tell Perry that Thomas says Pilgrim is faster than February. We will let the horses settle it themselves in the spring." Perry read this aloud, and Kate laughed, and he laughed too. And outside the window the Wyoming summer was doing its brief and beautiful best, and everything was moving forward. Cutter Dobbs was indicted in September on charges of fraud, conspiracy to defraud, and the obtaining of property by false instruments. Perry read about it in the territorial newspaper that came through Harlan County on the stage. The indictment was thorough. Marshal Hendricks, Perry suspected, had been building toward it for some time and had been waiting for exactly the kind of evidence that Kate had delivered. It would take time to work through the courts. These things always took time. But the mechanism was in motion, and a man being investigated for federal fraud is a man considerably occupied with his own problems and not available to make other people's problems larger. Kate read the article twice. Then she folded the newspaper carefully and set it on the table. "Good," she said. "Good," Perry agreed. In October, Kate told him she was expecting. He was splitting wood. She came out of the house and stood on the porch and watched him for a moment and then said his name. He set down the axe and looked at her. Her face was doing the thing where it held too many things at once, complicated and full of texture, and he waited. "We're going to have a child," she said. Perry Rourke stood in the October morning with the axe at his side, and the cottonwood leaves turning gold around the edge of the property, and he looked at his wife on the porch and felt the world rearrange itself around this new fact with a completeness that left him briefly without words. "Come here," he said. She came off the porch and walked to him, and he put his arms around her and held her with a care that was also, underneath it, a great deal of something that was not care but was related to it. She put her face against his shoulder and he felt her breathe. "How?" he said against her hair. "How do you think?" she said. He laughed. She laughed. They stood in the gold October morning with their arms around each other. "When?" he asked. "April, I think," she said. "I'm not entirely certain yet." "April," he said. "Same month we got married." "April seems to like us," Kate said. He built a cradle through the winter evenings. He had never built one before. He found instructions in a farming almanac and supplemented them with his own careful judgment, and built it from cottonwood because the wood was close, and because the grain of it was beautiful, and because he wanted it to be from this land specifically, from this place where everything good in his life had come together. Kate watched him work on it sometimes in the evenings without saying anything, just sitting near the fire with her sewing or her reading, and occasionally she would look over at the half-built cradle and at Perry's hands working on it, and her expression was one he had come to recognize as her entirely happy face, which was different from her content face or her relieved face in a way he could feel from across the room. Daniel brought the family for Christmas. Thomas and Eli descended on the homestead with the comprehensive energy of boys who have been on a wagon for several days and require space, and he gave it to them freely, watching them run in the yard with Clover's Colt February and make a project of building a snow fort that collapsed twice and was rebuilt with improved engineering each time. Thomas, who was a few months older than he had been at the wedding, had developed the particular confidence of a boy whose world has come back to rights, and it was very good to see. Eli had still not lost his interest in the chickens. Clara and Kate spent long hours talking in the kitchen, and Perry and Daniel sat in the evenings with coffee and talked about cattle and land and the practical architecture of building a life in a difficult territory. And there was something in those conversations that was genuinely good, the comfortable exchange of men who have become family and are learning each other. On Christmas Eve, Kate gave Perry a book. It was a volume of poetry, well made with a good binding, and on the inside cover she had written in her careful hand, "For the man who moved his horse, with everything I have." K. Perry read the inscription twice. He closed the book and looked at Kate across the Christmas table with all the people who mattered to them, and he thought about that first moment. The day she had driven her wagon around the bend through his cottonwoods, the day he had looked at her lame horse and his warm stall and made the simplest decision of his life. He had moved his horse. He had moved his horse because it was the right thing to do, the obvious thing, the only thing a person who had any basic decency would do, and he had done it without any expectation of what would come from it, and what had come from it was everything. The boy was born in late April. It took most of a day, and Perry was not equipped for those hours by anything in his previous experience, only by the fundamental intention to be present and useful and not to be afraid, though he was afraid in the way that anyone is afraid when the most important thing in the world is happening, and they cannot control the outcome. Clara was there, and the doctor who came from Gallon, a practical man named Alcott who had delivered children on the frontier for 20 years, and who had a calm that Perry found enormously reassuring. When it was over and the baby was wrapped and placed in Perry's arms for the first time, Perry Rourke, who had not cried in the presence of another person since he was 12 years old, stood in his bedroom with his son in his arms and wept quietly against the baby's head in a way that was entirely beyond his control and that he made no effort to prevent. Kate, from the bed, watched him. "Perry," she said. He looked at her. "Come here," she said. He sat on the edge of the bed with the baby still in his arms, and Kate put her head on his shoulder, and they looked at their son together. The baby had dark hair, Kate's hair, and he was making the small, concentrated, indignant expressions of someone who has just arrived somewhere unexpected and is assessing it seriously. "James," Kate said. They had been discussing names for months. They had agreed on James if it was a boy, after Kate's father's middle name, which was one of the few things about her father worth honoring. "James," Perry said. James Rourke opened his eyes, dark eyes, Kate's eyes, and looked at the room with the unfocused, serious attention of the newborn. And Perry thought that the world was a larger thing than it had been this morning and was still expanding. The cradle Perry had built from cottonwood stood by the bedroom window, and in the April afternoon light the grain of the wood was exactly as beautiful as he had hoped. That evening, when James was sleeping and Clara was cooking in the kitchen and Daniel had taken the boys outside to run in the spring afternoon, Perry went to the barn. He went because he always went to the barn in the evenings, and he needed the continuity of it, needed the smell of hay and horses, and the good, ordinary weight of the familiar after a day that had been extraordinary. Clover was in her stall, in her proper place, which she had occupied now for more than a year and a half since the cold snap had ended in Kate, and the two horses had become a permanent fixture of the Rourke homestead. He ran his hand along her neck, and she turned her head and bumped his shoulder in her familiar way. February was in the next stall, growing fast, all legs and curiosity. Della was in the south stall, healthy and sound, the lame leg long since fully recovered. Chester stood in his place with his head over the door and his ears forward, watching Perry with his mild, good-natured attention. This barn, his barn, the one he had built with his own hands and into which he had, on a cold December morning when a woman with dark eyes drove around the bend through the cottonwoods, moved his horse to make room. He stood in the middle of the barn in the lamplight and breathed. He thought about what Aldous Fenn's wife, who had died long before Perry arrived in Wyoming, and whom Perry knew only through Finn's rare references, had meant to Finn. He thought about the way Finn had looked at Perry and Kate together that first evening, and had simply said he would bring supper tomorrow. He thought about the fact that the whole thing had begun with something so small, a woman with a lame horse and a cold snap coming in, and a man who had an extra warm stall and the basic decency to offer it. Everything had come from that. The documents and the judge and Dobbs's indictment and Daniel's land. The campfire and the first kiss and the spring wedding and the blue dress and the kitchen garden growing in the cleared space where the brush had been removed. The colt February and the letters from Daniel and Thomas's horse Pilgrim coming home to him. The cradle built from cottonwood. James with his dark eyes and his serious newborn face, all of it from moving a horse. Perry Rourke stood in his barn and loved his life with a completeness that he had not known was possible before Kate Grayson drove around the bend through his cottonwoods on a cold day in December when the sky was the color of a tin plate and the cold snap was coming in. He heard the house door open and Kate's voice, clear in the evening air, calling his name. He heard the warmth in it, the ease of it, the voice of a person calling someone they know will come. He blew out the lamp. He went home. The years that followed were built from the same material. Hard work and good seasons and difficult seasons, and the ongoing project of a life made together. Daniel's land came fully back to him, confirmed by the court in the summer following James's birth, and the Grayson family returned to the Powder River claim with Thomas on Pilgrim and Eli on a new horse of his own, and Clara with her steady warmth, and Daniel with the look of a man who has come back to himself fully and knows it. Cutter Dobbs was convicted in the fall of '89 on 2 of the original 4 charges, and fined substantially and stripped of the holdings he had obtained by fraud, and sentenced to 18 months imprisonment. It was not everything the law could have delivered, and Kate said as much when Perry showed her the newspaper account, said it without bitterness but clearly and honestly, as was her way. It was a partial accounting, but it was an accounting. The families who had been displaced had their claims acknowledged. The record was corrected. The truth was in the official record now, and that mattered. James grew up to be a serious, curious boy who had his mother's eyes and his father's hands, and a particular gift for anything that had to do with horses. By 5 he could groom Clover without assistance, and by 7 he was riding February in the paddock, with a competence that made both his parents stand at the fence watching with expressions they were too proud to admit, were purely astonished parental admiration. Kate's garden expanded year by year. By the second summer it had grown beyond kitchen herbs and into a real productive kitchen garden, and by the third summer she had added fruit trees along the south fence, apple and plum, saplings that would take years to bear, but that she planted with the confidence of someone who knows where she is going to be. Perry noticed that and said nothing about it but felt everything about it. In the spring of '91, 2 years after James, Kate told Perry she was expecting again. This time the news arrived over breakfast, matter-of-factly in the way that things are told between two people who have stopped being careful with each other. Again, Perry said. Again, Kate confirmed, reaching for the coffee pot. February, he said. Same as James. October, I think, she said. October, he said. Stop calculating, she said. I'm not calculating, he said. You are absolutely calculating, she said. The second child was a girl. She arrived in October as predicted, quickly and with considerably less alarm than her brother, and she had Perry's lighter eyes and Kate's dark hair. And from her first week of life, a loudness and an insistence about her needs that her brother had never exhibited, and that Kate said came entirely from Perry's side of the family, which Perry contested on the basis that he was extremely quiet, and Kate said yes. Exactly. It is a reaction to all that quiet, and they argued about it pleasantly for years. They named her Clara Ruth, Clara for Daniel's wife and Ruth for Kate's mother, who had been a gentle woman in a difficult marriage, and who deserved to have her name carried forward. Clara Ruth, from a very early age, was interested in everything. She investigated the barn with the thorough scientific commitment of someone who intends to leave no detail unexamined. She followed her brother around the property with a devotion that was periodically returned with varying degrees of older sibling tolerance. She had opinions about the horses and expressed them at length, and with a confidence that Perry found simultaneously exhausting and entirely admirable. She also had, by the age of 3, established a particular bond with Clover that the mare seemed to reciprocate with the same patient, warm generosity she extended to everyone. Perry would find them sometimes in the late afternoon, his daughter and his mare, standing at the paddock fence in some kind of companionable quiet that he did not fully understand but deeply appreciated. The homestead settled into its full, permanent character. The house was added to twice, first with a bedroom for when Daniel and Clara visited, which they did regularly, and second with a proper study for Kate, who had taken it upon herself to begin writing down the account of what had happened with the Dobbs land fraud as a legal record and a family document, and something she thought the territory's historical record should have. The study had a south-facing window and good light, and a desk Perry built for her from pine, and she spent long hours there in the evenings and the early mornings writing in her careful, clear hand. Perry read what she wrote. It was good. It was true and it was clear, and it did not overdramatize anything, but it did not understate anything either, and reading it made him feel again the weight of those December days, the cold and the risk and the ride to Laramie, in a way that he found humbling. Kate had done that. Kate had carried all of that through on her own before he was involved, and she had done it for her brother and for 2 other families she barely knew because it was the right thing and because she had the particular kind of courage that does not announce itself. He told her this one evening, sitting in her study while she worked. She looked up from her writing. "You helped," she said. "Toward the end," he said. "You had already done the hard part." "The hard part," Kate said, "was the first day in your yard when I had to ask a stranger for help and meant it and didn't know what you were going to say." She looked at him with the direct, clear eyes that still, after years of marriage, made him feel something very vivid and immediate. "That was the hard part." Perry looked at her. "I said yes," he said. "You said yes," she said, "and then you moved your horse." They looked at each other across the small room in the lamplight with the Wyoming night outside and the children asleep in their rooms and Clover in her stall and everything exactly where it belonged. "I would do it again," Perry said, "without thinking." Every single time. Kate smiled. The full smile, the one that reached every part of her face. The one he had been seeing for years and that still did the same thing to him every time. "I know you would," she said. "That's why." He crossed the room and kissed his wife in her study in the lamplight, and outside the Wyoming evening was doing what Wyoming evenings do, being large and cold and indifferent and full of stars. And inside the house it was warm and full and exactly right. And Perry Rourke, who had come west at 19 with nothing but a saddle and $60 and a particular stubbornness about building something that was his, had built everything he had ever wanted. The barn stood solid and weathered and well-made at the edge of the yard, its timbers dark with the seasons, its roof good and tight, Clover's stall warm at its heart, and all around it the evidence of 11 years, and then some of a life built with intention and maintained with care and opened, at the right moment, to exactly the right person. When James was 12 and Clara Ruth was 10 and February had become a fully grown gelding, and Della's face had gone silver around the nose with age and Chester remained perpetually cheerful and mild. There was a particular evening in late summer when the whole family sat on the expanded porch after supper and watched the last light going out of the sky over the mountains in the way that Wyoming sunsets go, extravagant and then gentle and then gone. Daniel and Clara had come for the summer, as they had taken to doing. Thomas, who was now 17 and tall with his father's build, was talking to James about horses in the deep, serious way that young men talk about things they care about. Eli, 15 and growing, was sitting on the porch rail with the unconscious ease of someone completely at home. Clara Ruth had fallen asleep against Kate's side, her dark hair spread across her mother's arm. Perry sat with his arm around Kate's shoulders and looked at all of it. Kate turned her head and looked at him. "What are you thinking?" she said quietly, so as not to wake Clara Ruth. Perry looked at the mountains going dark, and the first stars appearing, and the cottonwoods along the creek rustling in the evening breeze, and the barn at the edge of the yard standing solid as it had always stood. "I'm thinking," he said, "about the day you drove around the bend." Kate leaned against him. "It was cold," she said. "It was cold," he agreed. "Della was lame," she said. "She was," he said. "And you moved your horse," Kate said. "I moved my horse," Perry said. "It seems like it was a simple thing," Kate said. "It was," Perry said. "It was a very simple thing." Kate Grayson Rourke, with her daughter sleeping against her side and her husband's arm around her and her family all around her and her land solid under her feet, looked up at the Wyoming sky filling slowly with its thousands of stars, and she was entirely, completely, permanently home. Everything good had come from a simple thing, and the simple thing had been enough.